Okay, hello. Thanks for tuning in. On the handout in the description, there are 4 poems by Theo Dorgan. You may want to pause this video and read them now. A constant theme for Dorgan is this tension. His mind, his voice, cannot become one. Greek, the collection where Ithaca appears, and Orpheus, a long poem published in 2018, are each in 2 opposed parts. Greek tries and fails to synthesize these in an epilogue called Sappho's Daughter, which begins, "An engine boomed and the world came crashing back as a jet flicked in the sky," sounding defeat. Orpheus does not even attempt this. In Bailnam Law, which is in Rosa Mundi, he says, "Stone and water mix in my hands, a voice divided against itself." What is divided against what in Dorgan's voice? His later Greek-facing books are half steeped in mythic and literary antiquity, half among coffee shops and pavements. So then, we could say ancient and modern, fine. But in Ithaca, Dorgan assigns Cavafy and even Leonard Cohen to the supposedly ancient half. Perhaps then, the divide is rather between myth and reality. But it is not as if the assassination of Michael Collins at Bailnam Law is, in any straightforward sense, myth. And besides, why should it cause anyone much anguish that myth is not reality? And how then to interpret the conflict in 4 a.m. jazz on the radio, which is not between myth and reality at all? The precise division in Dorgan's voice, I claim, is between what is not there and what is. In 4 a.m. jazz on the radio, 2 things are not there: the jazz musicians and the owner of the bed and eyes where Dorgan wishes to be. The jazz runs dreamlike with a 40s feel from out there in the dark. Are the bed and eyes less of a dream? We know nothing about them. In the last lines, they melt into the jazz, which melts away. The speaker of 4 a.m. jazz on the radio yearns for what is not there, but they are alone, bereft with what is. Hegel famously observed that thought involves negativity. It is by opening a space of not there in the world that we perceive, imagine, remember. That is what thought is. By itself, this activity prescribes no formal relation between what is there and what is not. In archaic and classical Greece, reality was roughly understood as the 2 somehow combined. Descartes changed everything by conceiving 2 independent worlds of extension in thought, which has led ultimately to the removal of thought with its qualitative character from our shared understanding of life. The most influential of Western thinkers since, such as Darwin, Marx, Freud, all presumed that extension alone is real. For them, thought is the blustering green head of the Wizard of Oz, and extension the man behind the curtain. By positing a Cartesian divide at the beginning, the prevailing wisdom of modernity has arrived at the belief that extension is all of reality, and in some cases, that subjective truth does not even exist. Dorgan's theme, therefore, is a fundamental one. Some Greeks theorized wave-like movements of history that their role was simply to go along with. Herodotus wrote about oracles and Polybius political cycles. Medieval thinkers saw through the prism of old paradigms. The life story of St. Francis, for example, was written by Bonaventure as a Christ story. On the other hand, it is normal for modern thinkers to deny that the past and future exist. The difference bespeaks how much our psychology has changed. Today, we are trapped in the present. We are like the opposite of those empty spiritualists whom Hegel accused of seeing a night where all cows were black. We live in shadowless daylight. As a poet, Dorgan has no choice but to feel things the ordinary way, by thinking and imagining, yet he cannot reconcile this with the pressures of realism, so his voice splits. I claim that the path out of Dorgan's dilemma runs through ancient thought. I am qualified in the Greeks, but as I believe in shopping around for one's wisdom, here is an epigram of Confucius. It concerns some poetic lines which he declined to anthologize in the famous Book of Odes. Slingerland, my translator, gives the allegorical interpretation of the 11th century commentator Su Shi, that in his words, if you sincerely love virtue, virtue will be yours. Confucius claims that to really think of something, we must change internally, so that what is there and what is not there are the same. This is perhaps controversial. Like Theo Dorgan's jazz enthusiast, the poem speaker is in love. How could anyone ask the lover not to miss their beloved? Confucius could be charged with ignoring the connection between love and wisdom. Wisdom as deep understanding, love as deep life. In fact, the Chinese character in use here for thinking of contains the characters for both brain and heart combined, with the same connotations for those organs as we would give them today. Compare this with this extract from Anne Carson's study of archaic Greek poetry, Eros the Bittersweet. Well known also is love's insatiability. Sappho wrote that Eros is gluku pikros, which Carson elsewhere translates as sweet bitter. It is sweet to love something, sweet to hold it, bitter that we cannot merge with it. Theo Dorgan's poetry is exciting in that he yearns for two to be one. In 4 a.m. jazz on the radio, this is most explicit. But in Balaam Law, there are echoes of it too when he speaks of a voice of flowers. To connect oneself with what is not there is also to connect with that inner yearning which is its absent presence. To be wise, therefore, is somehow to transcend and fulfill this yearning and make two one. Confucius argues that the best way to do this is not to eat what we love, but to let ourselves be eaten by it. His statement is the paradox that if you think of something and feel it far away, you are not thinking of it. This suggests that real thought is not what the singer of the ode does, nor what we normally do. He thinks of his beloved and knows that he is thinking of her, but because she is not there, what he thinks of is not her, but his thoughts of her. His thoughts are nothing but his manifested desire of her. That is what Confucius means. But how then to think of her in a way that means that she is not distant from him, even when she is? Paradoxically, he can only do this by having no desire of her. And he can only eliminate that desire by eliminating himself, which he must do by becoming only the thought of her. Parmenides' famous line that, and it can be translated in many ways, so this is just one, the same thing is for thinking as for being, was mocked even in its own time, but could be read similarly as being as much an ought statement as an is statement. Now, some would object to my using terms like love so omnivorously, and my heaping together of Confucius and Sappho, but I contend that these claims are obvious to most. The only reason that they are not to us is that we are too modern. Non-modern, non-dualists come in many forms, but they all share the conviction that it is possible to be whole with the world. Modern thought has subsequently discarded this, but for much ancient thought, it was the central ambition. Accomplishing it even briefly is the work of a lifetime, and those who aim at it are like monks. But to the extent that one succeeds, one makes present what is not there and finds what is real. This is hard in the present day, but it has been hard before also, at times when, for different reasons, the distinction between presence and absence was foregrounded in people's consciousness. The emergence of literacy in ancient Greece was one such time. Writing forces words into objects and prizes them from the clear realities that they mean. It can feel like a mirror of the universe, but upon reflection is just another piling on. Oral poetry is different, as Eric Havelock claimed in his preface to Plato, an old but brilliant study of orality in ancient Greece, which gives a lot of attention to the term mimesis. Mimesis describes the erasure of the boundary between the person and whatever it is they are a mimesis of. It is acting, but conceived differently than today. We imagine an actor inhabiting a role, whereas in the meeting of actor and role, mimesis conceives a third thing which is new. Plato despised this because his thought began with the separation of subject and object. But he was, as Danielle Allen has shown in her essential book Why Plato Wrote, and despite what Socrates claims in the Phaedrus, a philosopher of writing who naively posited an uncreated world of abstractions as the basis of truth. The wisdom of pre-Platonic thought was to understand how all things are both begotten and made. And mimesis performs the begetting and making together. It names the world. We should assume with Havelock that the hexameters of Homer, Hesiod, Parmenides, and Empedocles were a kind of rhythm of reality. And that the fact that writing broke this was, as Anne Carson suggests in her discussion of ice here, why so many Greek lyrics were about love. They channeled the desire of the missing. Today, we cannot return to Rhapsody, but we can read. Careful reading, while it has disadvantages, still enacts the hope of a different mimesis of a conceptual kind, by moving beyond ourselves into another's words. It is less direct than oral poetry, but still, gradually, it allows us to loosen the self-script. That is the spiritual side of letters, by which, as Allen has shown, even Plato was convinced. For me, the experience of reading ancient Greek in 4 years of undergraduate and 1 of doctorate has been this precisely. At first, I felt divided in 2, but slowly, I understood that they were 2 dreams, one of my imagination, the other of my culture, and with nothing else below them but the mirror, that strange reflective absence we call I. Not without cause, Pindar said that we are a shadow's dream. This conference asks what the study of the ancient world can achieve now. I think it can make the mind travel. Only the well-traveled loosen themselves enough to recognize the presence of absence. In an article about reading medieval texts called The Alterity and Modernity of Medieval Literature, Jauss modeled this procedure in 3 steps. Aesthetic identification, which I called similarity, alterity, which is the realization that the world is bigger than we thought, and modernity, real modernity, the kind that Bruno Latour meant, which I called self-consciousness. Simply put, in similarity we notice difference, and difference is how we change. At last, we realize that of knowledge there is no beginning or end, no bud from which the truth ripens. The truth is nothing but the movement of each mind from its first thought to its last. To go away from oneself and move is the present imperative of ancient Greek. In their books, Carson and Havelock describe the remarkable sensitivity with which Greek literature faced the triangular problems of absence, thinking, and desire. I will close here by adding to their work in one small way, applying Carson's observations about early Greek lyric to the Homeric hymn to Aphrodite. We can see a nice painting there. Homeric hymns are poems for and about the Greek gods, attributed to Homer in Antiquity, but now mostly dated to around the 7th and 6th centuries BC. The hymn to Aphrodite is thought to be the oldest. It tells of Aphrodite's seduction of Anchises, with whom Zeus makes her fall in love as revenge for besotting so many gods with mortals. She dresses and approaches Anchises on Mount Ida. She pretends to be human, but he does not believe her. She explains that he is Phrygian, or that she is Phrygian rather, the daughter of King Otreus, and was mysteriously carried to Anchises overnight by Hermes to become his wife. Eventually he gives up and they sleep together. And then in the morning, she takes her divine form and Anchises cowers under the blankets while she explains what will happen. She will have his son secretly. Anchises will collect him from the nymphs in a few years, but he must tell no one who the mother is. Readers know that the son will be Aeneas, Trojan War hero and much later the protagonist of Virgil's Aeneid. The poem breaks off abruptly and ends with a generic promise to sing about something else. Critics agree that the hymn portrays the final demarcation of humans and gods. Hesiod claimed that history was a regression from the first golden age of quasi-divinity through silver and bronze ages to the present dismal age of iron. Aeneas, bronze hero, was the last born son of a god. Two shadows stand behind Anchises in this poem. Ganymede, who was kidnapped by Zeus to be Olympus's cupbearer, leaving behind his devastated father Tros, who never knew what happened to him, and Tithonus, the lover of Dawn. When Dawn asked Zeus to make Tithonus immortal, he granted it, but she did not think to ask that he stay young, so he aged forever. Aphrodite is ashamed of sleeping with Anchises. The hymn asserts that mortals and gods should not mix, or at least not anymore. The departure of the gods fences the human condition. It is a kind of Greek mythic expulsion from the garden. Importantly also, the hymn is about sex. Relations between gods and mortals in Greek literature are either sexual, parental, or a weave of reciprocities. So I insult you, you kill my sons, I honor you somehow, you trick my would-be assassin in the night, and so on. But then, without the first two kinds of relation, the reciprocities lose their intelligibility. The gods now have become a mere vague sense of something missing, a desire, an object of thought and love. The hymn to Aphrodite is the description of an absence. It is the age of iron's poet's desire hexametered. Its gods and heroes are like beautiful things that we cannot touch. When people were separated from gods, they lost the direct and immediate link with the totality. Desire flooded through them just as its object flowed out of them. With no choice, they moved on and sang about other things. I will close with a fable. In the Symposium, Aristophanes says that lovers were originally combined with 2 heads, 4 arms, and 4 legs. They angered the gods and were split, so that now we walk the road searching for our other half. In this era, by turning our imagined ourselves into things, we have become like the depressed half figures of the fable. The deepest lesson of ancient study, I claim, is that we are wrong. Nothing at all has been lost. The 2 halves are each in us now as before. To the ends of the earth, wisdom and the lover of wisdom search for each other, not knowing that they are always the same thing. Thank you.